episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor. Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show with another really fascinating guest for you today, helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Lisa Gable, who is the Chief Executive Officer for the Food Allergy Research and Education Organization, or FAIR, which is an organization with a mission to improve the quality of life and health of the 85 million Americans currently suffering from food allergies and food intolerances, including 32 million of those who are at risk for life-threatening anaphylaxis, and ultimately providing them with hope and the promise of new breakthrough treatments. And to date, the organization has turned over $100 million of donor gifts into various groundbreaking research programs and has provided a voice for the community, advocating on its behalf and offering, as we say on the show, hope for a better tomorrow. And if that 85 million Americans isn't enough, this is a problem that affects about 500 million people worldwide nowadays. Ms. Gable has served 4 United States presidents and 2 governors, counseled Fortune 500 CEOs, and represented global public-private partnerships and nonprofits with end goals of moving organizations to higher levels of performance. Most recently, she served as the president of the Healthy Weight Commitment Foundation, where she created and led a coalition of food and beverage industry corporations and public health and government agencies, resulting in the reduction of 6.4 trillion calories from the American diet. She was appointed the first female U.S. Commissioner General to the 2005 Aichi World EXPO, holding the rank of ambassador. She served as a U.S. delegate to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women and served both in the Reagan White House and Defense Department, serving as advisor to the Secretary of Defense and Joint Chiefs of Staff. Her corporate experience is quite broad and varied. She served as Senior Vice President of Global Public Policy at PepsiCo, 15 years in Silicon Valley, including as Global Brand Identity Manager for Intel when Intel was developing their Intel Inside campaign. And when she's not doing all of that, among her varied volunteer activities, she served on several boards, including as a national trustee for the Boys and Girls Club of America, board member for the Girl Scouts of the USA, and a member of the Institute for Medicine Roundtable on Obesity Solutions. She's also a published writer. Her new book, Turnaround: How to Change Course When Things Are Going South, is going to be out October 5th on Amazon. And she has multiple recurring media appearances, including 4 years regularly scheduled guest with Lifetime's national morning program, The Balancing Act. Lisa holds degrees at both undergrad and master's, undergrad at University of Virginia, master's from Georgetown University. All that being said, Lisa Gable, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Ira. I'm so happy that we could do this.
Absolutely. I've really been looking forward to this one. Your background is fascinating. And, I'd love to start things off, as we typically do, by handing you the floor for a little bit. If you could take us a little more into your background, sort of the early days, everything from where you grew up, how you sort of got started on this path, and when, in your very varied career in defense and technology, when did health become of interest of yours?
Well, as you said, my background is non-obvious. It's very unusual, but I grew up in Lynchburg, Virginia. My father started an organization which became a national organization, and so I had the opportunity to watch a CEO who was building something. And truly, the intertwining piece of all aspects of my background and what I talk about in my book, Turnaround, is that I take the manufacturing principles that I learned at Intel Corporation and I integrate those with the rules and art of diplomacy that I learned at the White House and the State Department to help turn around organizations in government, philanthropy, and business. And so it's truly that manufacturing process management process that I learned at the feet of Andy Grove, which set the stage for how Silicon Valley companies really did manage internal processes that I try to bring to bear in everything. My own interest in health, it truly started when we had a family situation, which is that we had just adopted a young daughter at the age of 1 month, and my husband was diagnosed with ever reoccurring malignant thymoma and 2 autoimmune diseases. And so at that stage of our life, we really had to zig and zag, as he had seven operations in a period of 2 years, dropped to weigh 96 pounds. And that health issue enabled us to have sort of a first line management engagement with the medical field. His disease has again been treated really through the innovation of technology. And I can't stress that enough. Having a father who actually had multiple heart attacks, as well as open bypass surgeries, a husband who had been in and out of hospitals. What I've learned is that truly unleashing innovation changes the trajectory of all of our lives. My husband is still alive. He's actually managing a quantum computing startup as the president of that organization. And my father lived to be 83 years old due to medical intervention. So for us, it's a personal issue. And what we love to do in our lives is share what we have learned around these two complex disease paths to try and improve health and wellness for people in other fields. And so that led me into the Healthy Weight Commitment Foundation, and then obviously the disease of food allergies and the complexity of food allergies.
And innovation, as you mentioned, is an extremely important theme everywhere nowadays, especially on our show. And the one thing that I noticed, and I was really shocked because, and I'll bring FAIR in a little bit, but I really wanted to start things off with your experience, as you were saying, with the Healthy Weight Commitment Foundation, because I did not realize until I did a little Googling that food nowadays is this $9 trillion industry. And here you are back in 2009, and you're developing this new project, a $9 trillion industry. You had to bring together 16 major food and beverage companies, from Pepsi to Coke to Nestle, Kraft, General Mills, Kellogg, down the line, and basically get them all on the same page to do this thing, which in that case was reducing calories. Good for all of us. How did you do it? And what were some of the learnings? Obviously, you learned a lot about how to talk to people and put together consortium at the White House and the Defense Department. Tell me some of the things you learned from this experience, and we'll get into how it sort of translates to FAIR. But how did you do it? $9 trillion industry.
Well, it was a fascinating period of time, truly brought about through, once again, innovation. There were the confluence of a number of different events, which meant that companies did have the opportunity to make changes in the formulation of their packages. And so from a very baseline standpoint, the key was understanding that the companies had been focused on improving their manufacturing, finding new ways to produce products, and there were new ingredients on the market, such as stevia and monk fruit. Yeah. And so as we were bringing these 16 fierce competitors together under the leadership of Ingenuity as chairman of the board, what we did is identified a path forward that would work for all of them. When I walked into the situation, the companies had been meeting for about 18 months already, and they had been looking at multiple different ways that they as an industry can make a significant commitment. And they were looking at the reduction of sugars and fats, and they were looking at portion sizes, and they were looking at salt and sodium reduction. And we had a challenge in that there are standards of different food products like chocolate where you actually can't make a number of different changes. It's actually something that's governed at an international level. And also, food isn't made the same way. We were talking about 16 food and beverage companies whose portfolios included things from ice cream to frozen foods to 100-calorie packs to cookies and creamers. And bread. Bread is made in a very different way. So we entered into a conversation with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and our goal was to bring an organization as the independent scientific outside evaluator who could document what we were doing. We knew that there was not a lot of trust between the public health community and the food and beverage industries, and so we actually went to a group of people who had not had a collaborative relationship with the industry, which was key leaders in the public health category. And I can't say enough about Dr. Risa Lavisa-Mori, who was head of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation at that point in time. She and Indra had gotten to know each other through the Forbes and Fortune Women's events. They had become friends, and it was really through the leadership of those two women who enabled me to sit down with the 16 companies and identify a path forward. And that path was calories. It was an idea that generated from Claire Wong, who was part of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's cohort, and and Dr. Chorson Hanku, who was the chief scientist at Campbell Soup Company. We were all sitting in this offsite. We'd had 2 days. We had pieces of paper all over the walls. We were trying all sorts of different techniques to come up with some commitment we could make that would work across all product lines. And all of a sudden, those two women bounce up and said, it's all about calories. And what they recognized is we had to find a common denominators. Calories were the common denominator. And if you reduce calories, you reduced sugars and fats. And so enabling these companies to lean into an innovation cycle and actually compete against each other on health and wellness is what enabled us to drive to the reduction of 6.4 trillion calories across 35% of the food sold in the United States.
Amazing, amazing. And, you know, as if that wasn't enough, now we'll move on to FAIR. You know, I talked about some of these statistics. So 85 million Americans in the U.S., 500 million worldwide. And then within the U.S., there's 32 million that anaphylaxis, which is extremely life-threatening and extremely scary if everyone's ever seen it. Here, you're dealing with something, I guess, even grander, because you have foods, of course, this is an issue, but you also now need to bring healthcare to the table, which itself is this $8 trillion industry over here, the Genentechs, the J&Js of the world. Talk a little bit about the organization, how this got put into your lap now and say, okay, you did this thing with the food, now this food allergy thing is yours, and a little bit of how the organization is put together, because I know you have the pharma, you have the food, you also have these egg, dairy, and soy institutes. Walk us through a little of that, if you would.
Well, the FAIR is the result of a merger of a grassroots organization with a research organization in 2012. And actually, when they were doing the initial search for a CEO after that merger, I had received a phone call from headhunters who said, you're doing all this stuff in the food industry. I really think you'd be perfect. And you do these turnarounds, you would be perfect for being CEO of this organization. And at that point in time, I was working on the calorie commitment. So we were fairly busy as we were trying to line things up with the Obama White House. However, when I received the call in 2018, it happened to occur from Korn Ferry. Called me and said, we've heard that you might be available and this is an awesome job for you. And so the fact that a couple of people called me made me think I really should have the conversation. And I walked into a room and I met a wonderful, wonderful board made up of individuals whose children were the first to have multiple food allergies. The disease actually began to rise in 1998, in the late 1990s. And so this group of donors were individuals whose children were those first to have to seek accommodations, to have to go into restaurants and explain not only that they were allergic to one allergy, but in some cases they were allergic to 15 allergies. And they were truly the individuals who started funding the original research to understand why was this happening. We hadn't really, when I was growing up, I'm in my late 50s, we didn't have a lot of food allergies. It was highly unusual to find someone who did. And all of a sudden it's become 2 children in every classroom. And I was asked to bring industry to the table. There had been a bit of an acrimonious relationship between the food allergy community and industry. And what I knew through my experience with Healthy Weight, and as well as my experience in Silicon Valley, is that you really truly need the investment of industry into the innovation to bring the desired results to the consumer and to the patient. I mean, if you think about the food and beverage industry, and I used to joke about this, the companies I represented then basically were engaged with the consumer every single day, except for toothpaste and toilet paper, food's something you got to eat every single day. And so it's an industry that has a relationship with the consumer that is unique. And how do we at FAIR utilize that relationship to bring new offerings to the consumer, to bring clarity as to what is actually in the package of food that someone's trying to eat? It's a $19 billion market. And so as we brought home the fact that this is a big market, $9 billion is for allergen-free products, but $10 billion, I believe, truly is on the table for the consumer to re-engage. They're avoiding $10 billion of food right now because they don't understand the labeling that's on the packages. And so through a very simple process of changing those labels and making them consistent, we know that we can actually re-engage the consumer who will have a greater buying opportunity to find something that fits the price point point that they have. Secondarily, we have the pharma and biotech companies. And we had the first food allergy therapy be approved by the FDA, Palforzia. It's been purchased by Nestle. Some of our board members were actually involved with the founding of the company. And it's based on a concept called oral immune therapy, which means you feed incremental amounts of the protein that can trigger an allergic reaction to a child to desensitize them to their allergen. So we truly are the first that are engaged in documented food as medicine, because we're talking about food being used and to reduce the child's propensity to have an allergy. But secondarily is that we also have people involved from the prevention standpoint. What we learned through the LEAP study is that when you feed babies peanut between 4 and 6 months old, early and often, you significantly reduce the opportunity for that child to develop a food allergy. So now FAIR is funding a $8 million research project called SEED, Start Eating Early Diet, looking at multiple allergens that will be fed to 2,000 babies to see if we can reduce their chance of developing any food allergies. And think about how monumental that is. We're talking about 4 million babies born a year in the United States, 400,000 of them have the opportunity to develop food allergies. If this research is successful, and if it's successful, and if we get the word out to pediatricians and new moms, you could literally remove a fourth of the food allergy patients from the table. So we're at this cusp where innovation is at a point. There's a commitment of the pharma companies looking at different biologics that have multi-allergen potential. We are at such an exciting period of time to take a disease that grew very rapidly since 1998 and potentially make a huge dent in that disease over the next 5 years.
Really, really exciting. And I was looking at the portfolio. You clearly span this full gamut from diagnosis to treatment to prevention studies. Last year, you launched something called the FAIR Clinical Network, and once again, this is another staggering achievement. 50 academic medical institutes: Stanford, Northwestern, Harvard, UCL, Baylor, Duke, Emory, and Mount Sinai, all on the list. A broad institute. What's the clinical network all about, and what was it like setting that up?
Well, I'm glad you asked the question, and I have to give credit to my predecessor, Dr. James Baker, who came up with the idea of two things that he thought would make a difference in food allergies. For one, it was a nascent disease category. So one of the challenges that we had is there were actually no doctors. There were few doctors. There were some doctors, but there weren't a lot of doctors who made food allergy their specialty. And so Dr. Baker and his team helped build fellowship programs to basically incentivize doctors to come from other fields of immunology into food allergies. And secondarily, they set up the first FAIR Clinical Network, which was made up of 30 medical institutions around the United States. What we did is we took that to a whole new level, as you do through any innovation process. And we went back to all of the different medical institutions and we said, we're rebidding it. In other words, you have to apply again. And when you apply, you can apply for different ranges of activity. One is in a transformation center, which actually would do clinical trials as well as be the first line for investment on transformational research. But when you show up, this time you have to show up with partners. You can't just apply by yourself. And so integrating that partnership component to the FAIR Clinical Network really is what is energizing and creating and spurring so much activity. The second group of members within the clinical network are in our clinical trial centers. That's where we do clinical trials. And they had to demonstrate that they could effectively and had been in the past involved in clinical trials. They could actually recruit the patients. They had the systems in place to be a partner with industry. And then the other grouping is what we call standards of care center. We are trying to, there are only about 1,400 allergists in the United States. And so what we know, particularly in the area of meeting the needs of underserved populations, we need more and more people involved with basic treatment and basic care. And so we were really encouraging perhaps medical institutions that hadn't advanced and been involved in clinical research to date to just enter in as standard of care centers with particular levels of standard of care that they had to demonstrate they could provide. And so it's very exciting as we relaunched the FAIR Clinical Network. A number of Mayo affiliates have actually recently joined during the last few months. And so to have the best of class researchers. And the most exciting thing now is we are starting to hear from universities and medical institutions and innovation centers from across the world. And if any of those folks are listening, know that we want to do business with you. We really would love to align our research. We launched something called the Faith Challenge, which is a $3 million challenge to get teams from across the world to be offering up solutions for biomarkers that could actually help us measure the severity of the disease. And we have applicants from Italy, in Tokyo, in Israel, in England. And it's really exciting to see these applications come in with a focus on partnership, with a focus on bringing novel ideas to the table. And so it's an exciting time, as I said, in this space. And I just have to do a big call out to Dr. Tom Casale, our Chief Medical Advisor, and Dr. Bruce Roberts, who leads our research and innovation team. They've done a fabulous job bringing all of this online in the last 12 months during COVID.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was about to say that you did all this in the middle of a major pandemic, which again, I take my hat off to you and the organization. While we're still on this topic, Lisa, I just want to ask you one other thing before I get on to sort of a separate set of topics. You know, I look at what you do here in terms of calories, in terms of the food allergies, as really these major movements. I mean, you're really changing things dramatically. And one of the areas that you've probably seen in the show that I've been focusing a bit on lately has been the topic of healthy aging, which is something that is a bit of a movement in its own right in terms of the research and so forth that's going on there. Not yet propelled to the level of sort of changing, say, the pharmaceutical industry's interest in maybe treating cancer specifically or Alzheimer's specifically, as opposed to treating the underlying state of aging. Just wondering, are there any other major learnings that you could tell us at this point with these movements of things that are very critical to get to the table, where that innovation in some of these really cool labs becomes this major movement where all the pharma or all the food finally get behind you? Anything I missed or I should be asking you about, because this is your area of expertise?
Well, the one thing that, I've brought to every situation that I've been involved with for the past 38 years, 40 years, is partnerships. And it's critically important to partner. None of us can be all things to all people. None of us have all of the expertise required. And the exciting thing about where we are today, and I believe that Nestle is demonstrative of this, is you are really seeing this massive integration across pharma, agriculture, and medical foods, and regular sold in the store CPG products. It's a very exciting time, but what's going to require and what's going to happen is we're going to have unusual mergers and acquisitions going on. We're already starting to see it happening. And to get us there, each of our organizations need to align incentives to change. We need to align our spending with each other. I have a conversation going on with Crohn's and colitis. I have conversations going on with the celiacs organizations that I have so much respect for the CEOs of those two organizations, asthma and allergies. The reality is that one of us is going to have a piece of the answer. And so in each case, it's getting people to leave their egos at the door, acknowledge what they can bring to the table, be willing to align with what someone else is doing, and come in as a group to solve a very important project. Because if you don't do that, competition is great. Very much of a capitalist at heart, free market, a libertarian to some degree. I love capitalism. However, capitalism is only going to work if we do it together. And we have to invest together. And we need to also see the world from the other person's point of view, whether it's on the international NGO front or if it's on the domestic front. There are ways to partner. And I'm just thrilled and excited to be able to help people figure that out.
Outstanding. Lisa, I know I've read various articles about you, and mentoring is a major passion of yours, especially mentoring other women. Talk a little bit about what you're doing currently in mentoring. What are some of the core focuses, and also talk about your past too, some of the important mentors over the course of your career.
Well, I can't say enough thank yous to all of the mentors who have been in my life. And the critical thing to know is that you are never too old to have mentors. As you mentioned, I just wrote a book. Well, I'd never written a book before. I knew nothing about book publishing. I truly knew nothing about book marketing. I've learned a lot over the past 6 months since we started this effort. But the reality is you don't know everything. And you always need to find good people to help give you guidance along every step of your path. I was fortunate in that I had Craig and Barbara Barrett. Craig was soon to be the CEO and chairman of the board of Intel when I first met him. Barbara at that time was deputy administrator of the FAA. She went on to be a U.S. ambassador to Finland, served on the board of big companies like Raytheon, and also was the U.S. Air Force secretary during the last administration. And I think her biggest accomplishment was the Space Force. So, you know, it's pretty cool when your personal mentor actually starts Space Force. But I also had the opportunity to work with Elaine Chow, who was always very generous in her connections. And she's always been available to me, dating back to 1985, where if I send Elaine a note, even if we haven't talked for a long time, she instantaneously replies. Or Admiral Marcia Evans. Admiral Evans was one of the first women to achieve 2-star rank in the United States Navy. We got to know each other during Tailhook, where we were both working closely with the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chiefs on analyzing what was going on in the military around sexual harassment. And she went on to serve on 7 boards. She was on the Weight Watchers board, for example, and has again always been someone who's been available to me. So in my own mentoring relationships, I've tried to do what my mentors did to me. One is you're in for the long haul. This is not a moment in time. It does not mean that you have to maintain an active and ongoing relationship with an individual, but what you are looking to do is help that individual through the big steps of their life. And so I've written many, many letters of recommendation, and I laugh because when I was U.S. ambassador to the World's Fair, I had 72 staff, half of whom were all college students that spoke Japanese, so they were working at the fair, and I wrote graduate school letters of recommendation, White House job recommendations. I've done security clearances. I helped somebody get into dental school. I have a couple of individuals who are now in their late 30s, early 40s, who I'm helping to figure out, executive compensation, because they, of course, have gone on to do great things. And there is a great deal of power in that. The other thing I learned from Barbara is replace yourself with another great person when you leave something. And so what she did is that when she was leaving a corporate board or an academic board or even a government board, she would recommend me as her replacement. Mm-hmm. And so I've also done that because that's how you help your own mentees up the career ladder, is that whenever I leave a board or I leave a job, I recommend someone to replace me who's a heck of a lot better than I am. I always joke that if I leave a nonprofit board, I usually try to recommend somebody who has a lot more money than I do so that they can help the nonprofit through a big donation, but also through the context that they have. And so mentorship to me is that daisy chain. It's maintaining that relationship. I've been blessed with the women and the men who've been in my life and have done that for me. Sandy Douglas, who just retired from Staples, have been an executive at Coca-Cola North America. Again, another person who's been available to me whenever I've had a big question or trying to solve a complex problem. So you don't need to see the person all the time, but you do need to know that when they reach out to you and use your time wisely, it's always wonderful to respond. And I just feel blessed for those who've done it for me.
Wonderful. Lisa, you've had quite a few successes over your career. Yet October 5th, 2021, your book Turnaround's coming out, and it says on the Amazon page, sometimes things don't always go the way we want, and they do go south. Talk a little bit about sort of what you're going to be talking about in this book, and some of what we could be looking forward to.
Well, I appreciate your asking, and I was encouraged to write the book during COVID. And so on Saturdays and Sundays, I would wake up at 7 a.m. and write until 4 p.m. So it really was a labor of love during that time period. And one reason I was encouraged to write the book is that we know we are entering into a time period that is truly unpredictable. We've been in an unpredictable time period for the last 18 months. And so I'm trying to convey sort of the core management techniques that I've learned throughout my career to manage truly a wide variety variety of turnarounds. I mean, there's no relationship, one would think, between a World's Fair, which is almost like Disney World, to food allergies, to the Intel Inside and the Intel corporate branded program. But what we learned is that if you take 4 steps, you'll get there. One is visualize the future. The second is to break down the past, truly understand what went wrong at the most basic level. What's the underlying cause of the problem that you're facing? Once you figure that out, you can take step number 3, which is you create a path forward from the past to the future that you've envisioned. And number 4 is, with doing that, you can execute with speed, confidence, agility, and heart. And I think what's going to be different about this book is that I have always tried to manage with heart. You mentioned mentoring. When I walk into a situation and we've had to let people go from the organization due to the economics of the organization, I realize immediately it's nothing to do with those individuals. They were in an unfortunate period of time. And I think we're going to see a fluctuation. And we're also going to see a lot of mergers and acquisitions. Be kind when people depart. Mm-hmm. And there are a couple of reasons why. One is they're good people. And so the world's going to be better off if you help good people to the next stage of where they need to go. And so offering them letters of recommendation, being available to provide a recommendation by a phone call, integrating them into your network, I do truly believe it's important. And as I've now been, I've been working since I was 19 years old and starting in the Reagan administration. So, I've been working for almost 40 years. I am always stunned and amazed who you run into again in your life. And I've worked all over the world, and I've run into people literally in Tokyo and Hong Kong and Germany. The reality is the way and the manner in which you treat people and acknowledge who they are and the good things that they do is important, because you will run into them again. Mm. And so that element of heart combined with the manufacturing processes, I believe, will help give people the basic tools they need, if it's just a church turnaround, or if it is, that they're in a project that they're involved with, or maybe they're in a political campaign that's not going very well. I've been able to use these tools, and they've been successful in turning things into an upward trajectory.
Outstanding. And we could all use more upward trajectory in 2021. So I'm excited about the book when it comes out. This is really fascinating, and amazing set of projects that you've accomplished, what you're doing now, and really just wishing you the best with all of this. For everybody that is going to be listening to this show on the podcast network or watching on our YouTube channel, you've been listening to the amazing Lisa Gable, Chief Executive Officer, Food Allergy and Research and Education Organization. Be on the lookout for her new book, Turnaround: How to Change Course When Things Are Going South, coming out on Amazon October 5th, 2021. Lisa, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us today. Thank you for everything you're doing there. And as we like to say on our show, thank you for helping to create the better tomorrow through everything you're doing. Very, very inspirational story.
Well, wonderful to see you today, and thank you so much for having me.